Andrew, thank you for taking the time. How's your day going, aside from answering the same questions over and over and over again?
Oh, I'm great. I'm in Death Valley right now, but that's a long story. We don't have to talk about that. But my day is going great.
Death Valley, say hi to the Undertaker. But anyway, uh, thank you for making this film. It was announced pre-pandemic, but when did you actually finish it?
I finished most of production right before the pandemic. Like I remember, I did a Kickstarter, I got some money, and that took me through most of production. I had my long list of people I wanted to interview, and I remember it was Mark Arm and Steve Turner from Mudhoney, and we did this interview, and it was kind of that thing. Like at the end of it, we're like, do we shake hands? Do we bump elbows? Ha ha ha! There's this virus. Kind of seemed like we're heading back to Seattle. Seems like maybe there's some cases and world shut down, but I had pretty much interviewed, shot most of what I wanted to, so I could, did a lot of editing during sort of pandemic lockdown and during the pandemic. And then
Right.
there were interviews I wasn't able to get before that I did get, once things opened up again. But yeah, it's been a long ride. It's been like 9 years making this film.
Yeah. My first exposure to this film was the trailer where you do the wonderful task of naming all the genres and phases of Red Cross. And that really spoke volumes to me because I a lot of times have interviewed former members of Red Cross without really remembering they were former members of Red Cross. Like when I recently interviewed Victor Andrizzo again, I went, "Oh, I forgot you were in Red Cross," that kind of a thing. It's one of those bands kind of like Quiet Riot or LA Guns. You forget how many members there were.
Yeah.
But this current lineup is fantastic. It's almost like a classic lineup.
It is. I think. I mean, and this lineup's been pretty stable for a while, by certainly by Red Cross standards. And yeah, I mean, you've got Dale Crover from the Melvins and Nirvana on drums is a legend. Jason
Yeah.
Shapiro was in Celebrity Skin, which is a really legendary LA band, and he's been in the band for a long time. But you're right. I mean, it is true. Like, I mean, Victor and Drizzo. Even when I started making the film, I wasn't even really aware, that Victor was in the band because he was in the band for a weird period of time, and he quit the band during making of their album Third Eye, and so he's kind of not credited. He's not on the record cover, but it's just like there's Victor and Drizzo, who's played on a million like gold records and has played with Willie Nelson and Alanis Morissette and all sorts of people, and it's just like an incredible legend. And it's sort of like he's a tiny footnote like in the Red Cross story because so many people have come through the band. And in the movie, I don't have time to explain to people like who Victor and Drizzo is, or Brian Reitzel, another drummer. I'm like, well, Brian Reitzel did all the movie for all the music for all of Sofia Coppola's movies, and he was in Air for a while, and it's just like,
Yeah. The Who.
yeah, he's just like drummer number six, like,
Yeah, barely we acknowledge Vicky Peterson, hey, that's one of the Bangles, one of
yeah.
the pioneering bands. So you had the Herculean task of going, this is a band that arguably formed in 1979. We've got 40 plus years of history. How do we cram it into the whole thing while clearing the music, while getting everyone's sides that don't contradict, while keeping it entertaining and light, while getting all these people from Pearl Jam and these iconic bands in there at the same time? Did you have the question in that? It's not just a compliment. The question was, did you have an outline coming into the whole film about what the story was going to be?
I mean, I did have a bit of a kind of script or whatever. My first stage, once I interviewed all these people and transcribed all these interviews, and I had this mountain of material, and I sort of went through and I started to just like pull quotes, sound bites from all these interviews from the transcripts and organize them into folders of different subject matter. And
Mhm.
then once I had that, I did start to almost make this like oral history. Like if you looked at it, it reads like an oral history. I was just sort of weaving together all of these sound bites from Jeff and Steve and from all the other supporting people in order to tell the story, as a way of just organizing my thoughts. And I did have like an assistant editor. I was just like, will you take this? It's all got the time code and everything. Just
Mhm.
cut this. There's no archival footage, just talking heads. And it was like, and that script that I wrote only got us up to like, I forget which record. Maybe it got us into right in the beginning of the 90s. And that was like 4 hours when he cut that all together. So it was just like, but it was like there was a lot of good stuff. And so
Yeah.
what I learned, because I'm a TV writer by trade, like my day
Yes.
job, when you learn writing is like it's often, your first draft seems so bad, but you're like, if I just move the good parts closer together, maybe this is actually going to work. I just have to I have to cut all this bad crap out of it and move those good parts closer together. So making this was really just like, we've got so much good stuff here. Let's just leave it just nothing but that. Like, let's just cut out everything, and always with the sort of guiding star of like, I want this movie to work for people who've never heard of this band. I want this to work for someone who comes in knowing nothing about Red Cross. The way it's just like, I loved Dig, the music documentary Dig. I didn't really know Brian Jonestown Massacre or Dandy Warhols walking into that movie. I mean, you kind of vaguely knew, but I didn't know about them, and it didn't matter. And I wanted this to just be that same thing. Like anything, the sort of measure was just like, is this going to be interesting to someone just walking in off the street,
Right.
or is it just interesting to like the hardcore Red Cross fans? And if that's the case, I'm like, save that for the DVD extras. This has to work for a total neophyte coming in cold.
Yeah,
So
kind of like
really,
to rudely interrupt you, kind of like Anvil, where you didn't have to be an 80s metalhead to get the personalities, and these were like two childhood friends that had their differences, but were still together all these years later.
yes, and it's like that character study. I mean, it's so funny because when I first met with Steve and Jeff McDonald to talk about this, Steve said to me, he's like, "You're not going to make it Anvil, are you?" And, and I think what he meant by that, I mean, part of me was like, look, we should be so lucky. That's one of the greatest music documentaries of all
Yes.
time. But I think what he meant by that is he feels like for a lot of that movie, maybe we're laughing at the Anvil guys. Like they're sort of almost like a butt of a joke. And he's like, and I said to him, it's just like, it couldn't be that because you guys have been cool for 40 something years. Like you've never not been cool. Like I couldn't make you guys not come across as cool. And I'm also just a huge fan, and that's why I'm making this.
Right.
But that said, if someone's just like feels like, oh, this is kind of like Anvil, I'll take that compliment because Anvil's freaking amazing, right? And you don't, I went into Anvil, I'd never heard of the band. I certainly don't care about that genre of metal, but it was just like you fall in love with those two characters, and it's just like it just works.
Well, back to the TV writer thing. Everyone throws the Friends credit. The I bow down to you credit is worst week for me. I thought that was one of the funniest shows ever, that it's a shocker it didn't go 8 seasons in the US. That kind of a
I
deal.
know it's not, I keep waiting for it to have a sort of cult following, and I've heard, this has. I'm so glad to hear people because it was a really, I think that is great, and it was a really hard show to write because it was sort of solving these math problems, like it was just like, all right, we want him to like set his in-laws' pool on fire by the end, like, all right, let's work backwards, like how
Right.
might you set a pool on fire or whatever, and it was just these sort of Rube Goldberg contraptions that was just a very unusual kind of writing, but I love hearing that. That's cool that you're a fan.
Well, where I was going with that is, were there a lot of indie rock related people who would know who Red Cross is or was in Friends or Worst Week, any of those writer rooms?
I mean, there are other music fans among TV like comedy writers. Certainly there are some, but it's like those things were kind of kept. I kept those worlds a little bit separate, like I'd have my like comedy writer friends. I've got like my punk rock, like let's go to shows friends. But yeah, I mean, I think there are, and there's. I wish I had, in retrospect, because like I put a Muffs sticker in Joey and Chandler's apartment on their bulletin board, and
Really?
and it was up there for a few seasons, and at some point I learned that like that the guys from the Muffs had like seen it and wondered like how the hell did that end up there, and so Ronnie from the Muffs, I was able to tell him like that was me, like I put that up there, and he was like, oh my God, and I was like, oh man, I wish I had kind of done that for more bands I love, like you've got this most mainstream show ever, like to get some just like indie rock, punk rock stuff in there would have been cool. But, that was my one gesture.
Did Ronnie ever tell you the story of the Instagram handle at David Lee Roth?
I'm not going to give away his email address, but I know David Lee Roth plays a large part in his email address. But no, I
Yes.
don't know that story. I'll have to get that out of him.
Long story short, he had the Instagram handle at David Lee Roth, and Roth team basically had to get it from him through a cease and desist honorary kind of thing. And gotta love that, Ronnie, and gotta love those muffs. But back to you here. The last two questions before I let you go. This was such a long in the works documentary for you, and you've steadily worked for a few decades now. Are we allowed to know what's next from you?
I don't know in terms of another film. Like, this one is still getting launched, and like there's still all those DVD extras. I've got big plans, but I got to edit those. So there's still more work to be done because I do. I've been saying to fans like all along when they bring up like at the festival screening, like, hey, what about this? Like, hey, what about Desperate Teenage Love Dolls? What about Tater Tot? I'm like, all right, those are going to be DVD extras. So I got to do that and get that finished. And then, it's just a question of, can I find, I mean, this turned out to be like, I just had this hunch that this was a good subject for a documentary. And it was
Yeah.
ended up being true, like in spades. Like, they were even more charismatic and interesting than I thought they would be. I loved hanging out with them. I loved every minute of like interviewing them and talking to them. And I think there's so many incredible parts to their story. And there were so many cool people who were witnesses and eyewitnesses to various parts of it. And you get to just sort of move through the history of sort of Southern California rock music from the late 70s till now by talking to people who were part of their story. So, the question is finding another subject that is as interesting to me and that, knowing what it takes to make one of these, the dedication. Like, you can't just be casually interested in something. You have to be like
Right.
obsessively fascinated. And I don't know if I'd like to make another documentary. It wouldn't necessarily be another music doc, but there's no plans right now because I'm still so just like this baby is still like learning to walk and getting out, whatever. I don't know. I don't have a good metaphor, but it's like I'm still sending this one out into the world.
Well, you half answered my last intended topic slash question with that response, but I'll ask it anyway. Michael Rappaport made his great A Tribe Called Quest documentary. I thought it was great, and they disowned him pretty quickly and tried to say that it wasn't really what was going on. I believe Rappaport. I'm Team Rappaport. The Howard Stern upbringing makes me pro Rappaport. But in your case, it sounds like you can still go to Red Cross shows.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, those guys, like, I do think we've become friends, which is this like cool thing. And I mean, I saw them 2 nights ago. They played at this L7 festival, and it's the third time I guess I've seen them on this tour. And they play, the song "Born Innocent." So I asked them, during the making of this, I was like, "Would you write a song for the closing credits? I'd like to have an original song in the movie." And I was even more specific. I was like, it would be so cool if you guys wrote a sort of autobiographical song a la Creek Alley by the Mamas and Papas, History Lesson Part 2 by the Minutemen, Ballad of Mata Hoople by Mata Hoople. Like, I was speaking to them as like rock fans and like, they know those kinds of songs. And so they wrote this song, Born Innocent, which is sort of tells their origin story. And it's in the closing credits. And what's so amazing is that they play it, it's in their set every night now. It's not just like they wrote some song that's like like it was kind of a throwaway. And no, it's in the set. And every night when they introduce it, they acknowledge, they made by name and say like, hey, Andrew Reich like asked us to write this song. And so no, we're on very good terms. I mean, it was very clear from the beginning, this is my movie. You don't have final cut, and I was nervous because there's some warts and all kind of stuff in there, but they love it. They're really happy with it. And it's been really fun doing Q&As with them. And yeah, so we're good. I haven't gotten Rappaported by them.
Thank you for making this film. So great that you're featuring an excellent, deserving band. Hopefully it multiplies the fan base to the point that it makes them wealthy, but not to the point that you can't get tickets to the shows. So looking forward to what's to come from you and from Red Cross, Andrew.
Thanks so much, Darren. Yeah, I hope I'm guest list for life. But thank you so much.
Paltrocast.